All right. Hi, everybody. I'm so glad that you are able to join us this evening for another session of our Winter 2021 Beyond the Walls series, which is a partnership between the Oshawa Public Libraries and the Faculty of Social Science and Humanities at Ontario Tech University. I would like to start our evening together with a land acknowledgement. We are thankful to be welcomed on these lands in friendship. The lands we are situated on are covered by the Williams Treaties and are the traditional territory of the Mississaugas, a branch of the Greater Anishinaabe Nation, including Algonquin, Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi. These lands remain home to many Indigenous nations and peoples. We acknowledge this land out of respect for the Indigenous nations who have cared for Turtle Island, also called North America, from before the arrival of settler peoples until this day. Most importantly, we acknowledge that the history of these lands has been tainted by poor treatment and a lack of friendship with the First Nations who call them home. This history is something we are all affected by because we are all treaty people in Canada. We all have a shared history to reflect on, and each of us is affected by this history in different ways. Our past defines our present, but if we move forward as friends and allies, then it does not have to define our future. Our practice in these events is to turn our attention to our guest, who will speak for roughly 20 minutes. We'd appreciate it if everybody could please keep themselves on mute during this time. Afterwards, we turn the remainder of our time over for questions and discussions, and you are welcome to unmute yourself to participate in that. And you are also welcome to put any and all of your questions in the chat. And now I am so excited to introduce my wonderful colleague, Sharon, who does research on stuff like teaching with technology, digital feminist identities, and student mental health. She teaches with me in Ontario Tech's Communication and Digital Media Studies program. And this evening, she'll be encouraging us to think about what we really use grades for and how we might revamp this system to make learning a better educational experience. As someone who's been nominated for and won multiple teaching awards, Sharon is the best person with the inside scoop on how to make this work. So please join me in welcoming her this evening.
Thank you, Andrea. You're such a wonderful colleague. Thank you for inviting me to do this, and thank you for that lovely introduction. I would like to thank everybody who showed up tonight on this Monday evening during a stay-at-home order. I'm sure you have lots of very exciting places to be other than your own home hanging out with me. So thank you for that. I also, before I start, want to acknowledge our academic colleagues at Laurentian who really are facing the unthinkable. And tonight, I'm going to talk a bit about decolonization. And this is kind of part of the shared struggle that our colleagues at Laurentian are experiencing. So before I started, wanted to acknowledge that. So I also am curious where people are joining us from, because I put this out on Twitter. So I'm wondering if you can just throw in the chat where you're coming from. I would love to know where everybody is, because I think it's kind of all over. Denver, oh my goodness. Holy. Come on, California. Oh, this is awesome. Okay, so we're like everywhere. Oh, and people are in my home in Massachusetts. That's amazing. Okay, so we have a very broad and all-encompassing group tonight, a very international gang. So thank you for that. So tonight we are going to talk about grades, and we're going to talk about not grades. And I'm going to give you a sense of what it's like to be in my classroom. So what it's like just for a moment to be a student of mine. And I can see that there are a bunch of my students here and you're warming my heart. Thank you so much for showing up and being part of this. So the first thing I'm going to ask you, all my students will know that I start all of my classes with a ridiculous poll. So I'm going to ask you this. What is the worst grade you ever got? Like ever in your life? Could be elementary, could be high school, could be university, whatever. Oh, this is really good. Oh, we have a good group. You people are fun. I'm going to give it a second. There's about 80% of people who voted. And then I'm going to share the results. You people are awesome. 44% of the people in this Zoom room have gotten an F. And that is amazing. That's so awesome. So, okay, so there's what, like 200 people here or something. So this is what it's like to be in one of my classes. I'm going to ask somebody, do you have a story about your F that you're willing to share with the group? Who is willing to share an F story? Out of 200 people, somebody is bound to be okay with sharing a story. I'm going to look in the chat. Okay, Alicia plagiarized a classmate's paper. Now, let me ask you, Alicia, does that matter? Now, Miguel, oh my God, you're here. You failed math 11 in grade 11 3 times. Okay. Alicia, Miguel, Laura didn't turn in a seminar paper. Does that grade, does that F that you got matter today? So Catherine, another one of my amazing students, oh my God, you're here too. Catherine got a 21% on an organic chem. Catherine is in my class this semester. Does anybody's awful grade matter today? Yes or no? Just put it in the chat. No. Exactly. Okay. Nobody's saying yes. Okay, this is perfect. All right. Oh, Daphne, you're here. Oh my God. This is the best day ever. Okay, so your bad grade doesn't matter. Like your bad grade really in the grand scheme of things doesn't matter. I will tell my own story. I got an A minus. This is how nerdy I am. I got an A minus in the final semester of my undergrad, like my senior year of undergrad. That stopped me from getting a 4.0. And my brother, when he went to university, my brother's crazy. He's like wild and he partied his whole way through. He somehow, I don't even know, but he got a higher GPA than I did in undergrad. And this still bothers me. So clearly there's something either wrong with me or wrong with grades. So I'm going to give you a little bit of history about grading. And grades are kind of more or less a 20th century invention. Until 1897, universities had public exams. They were kind of like a debate or like a thesis defense, which obviously we still have thesis defense. And it all started at Cambridge University in England, all this ranking and sorting of people. And this is kind of ironic because this is my alma mater. This picture is Corpus Christi College, Cambridge, which is where I went to do my PhD. Corpus Christi College actually didn't admit women until 1988. And that's a whole other talk that I can give some other day. But anyway, as more and more people went to university, they didn't have time for all these spoken exams. So they decided to have a written component, especially in things like math and science and engineering and stuff like that. So in like the late 1800s, Harvard adopted a 20-point scale, which then in like 1870, Yale then adopted that same scale. So the scale that we now know, we all know as like the A to F scale, started at Mount Holyoke College in 1897. And the irony there is that Mount Holyoke is an all-women's college in Massachusetts. And we'll talk about the kind of ranking and sorting and gender problems with all this in a bit. But I have been in school since the 70s, and I haven't left. Like, I started in the 70s and I'm still in university. Like, I'm just on the other end of it. And this has given me a lot of time to think about grades. I mean, I'm only 21, so there's kind of an anomaly between being born in the 70s and only being 21. But anyway, why do we need to care about assessment and grades, especially at the university level? Like, why do we even care about this? Well, grades are important because students need to get into grad school. Maybe this is a good reason. Students need to prove that they're worthy of carrying on, and there's like a gatekeeping in terms of getting into grad school, med school, law school, whatever, PhD, master's, whatever. Students also need to prove that they learned stuff. So if you do well on a test, then that shows that you learned. Students also really want to know their GPA. Like, they really want to know their GPA. I have a 17-year-old at home, and she's obsessed with her GPA. And I'm like, yeah, I can't even remember what the number is. But she's like, I have a 3.98 or whatever. I'm like, okay. So the other reason maybe grades are important is because grades motivate students. Students are like, I'm going to get the A. I'm going to get the A minus. I'm not going to get a C anymore. I'm going to get the B. So maybe grades motivate students. And another reason is maybe grades are a fair way of representing learning, because all students are kind of kept to the same standard. They're measured by the same standard. So these are, like, we have grades for lots of reasons, and maybe these are some of them, but they're not. Those are really terrible reasons to have grades. They're awful reasons to have grades, and they're not. This is the whole reason why we need to talk about this. The reason we need to care about assessment and grades is equity, diversity, and inclusion, because grades don't always reflect what a student learned. Grades don't reflect where a student started and where a student finishes, because every student has a different beginning and a different end, right? And grades don't reflect effort. Like, one student could get really lucky or maybe work less than someone else who worked really hard, and, you know, numbers kind of get jumbled up. Grades usually don't reflect creativity. There's like exceptions, of course, but usually giving a grade doesn't really reflect higher order thinking and reflection. And one of the main reasons that I hate grades is because my job is to help students succeed. And at the start of the semester, sometimes students don't know what they're doing. They're like, I don't know how to write this paper. I don't know how to do a blog post. I don't know how to do all this stuff. And so maybe they could start by like getting C's or something. And then at the end of the semester, they're like, oh, I understand. I know what to do now. And then they're getting A's at the end. But if you average all of that, then the student is punished for not knowing stuff at the beginning and then figuring it out toward the end. So we need to really reflect on how people learn and how students demonstrate that learning. So how do we reflect citizenship and democracy? How do we reflect justice, experience, contributions? And how do we decolonize education? Because so much of how we assess people in all ways is racist, it's sexist, it's ableist, it's classist, and I really want to move away from this. So another kind of thing that I like to do in my classes is to get people involved. And I'm going to ask you an anonymous question. I swear to God, this is anonymous. I'm going to put this in the chat. I'm going to put this link in the chat. And I'm going to ask you the question here. Just click on that link and it's going to take you to a website. The question is, what are you addicted to? You can put in as many answers as you like, but I would appreciate it if you don't do anything. So don't say anything rude. Okay, people, this is like the public library. And I feel compelled to ask people not to be rude because a lot of my friends are in this call and a lot of my friends are of questionable character. So I'm going to ask you, keep your answers clean, please. And I'm gonna take myself to that website too. Okay. So lots of people are addicted to food type things. Wow, y'all are coffee drinkers, huh? Cool. Okay, so we're like, you can kind of be a voyeur and look at here and see what people are addicted to. Mostly caffeine, food. No one's done anything terrible or scary. Okay, this is good. So you're not alone. Everybody is kind of addicted to something, right? So coming back to the notion of being addicted to stuff, I'm going to suggest that our culture, our educational culture anyway, is addicted to grades. All of us, students, faculty, staff, employers, people hiring students when they leave, parents, everybody. We're all addicted to grades. And if you think about what addiction is like, and I'm stretching this a little bit, I'm stretching this metaphor, but you see where I'm going here. People do really weird stuff when they're addicted to things. Like I drink like 2 cups of tea before I even function on the daily. And if I didn't have a cup of tea in my house, like if I didn't have tea or like milk or whatever, I would actually drive to go get it. Right. So people do unusual things for stuff they're addicted to. They'll cheat, they'll lie, they'll steal, they'll cry, they'll have a tantrum. So you can imagine that I've seen students do things like this. So grades tend to encourage people, like both faculty and students, to focus on the grade rather than the learning. Even our learning management system amongst faculty at universities focuses on grades. We have Canvas at Ontario Tech, and in Canvas it's called speed grading. So that online grade book in Canvas is, do you remember like when you were a kid and you were in school and your teacher had that red book that was kind of like a big long spreadsheet, and there were like he or she would fold over the page so you could still see everybody's name, right? We still have that in university. It's just digital now. It's just web-based. So we're operating in a system that really perpetuates this addiction. It's set up to cause, support, and encourage this. And the research shows, the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning research shows that if a faculty member gives a student a grade and feedback on the grade, the student focuses on the grade. So I could write like 2 pages to a student on how they could improve or what they did well or what they did poorly or what they need to do next, but they don't really read that. All they want is the grade. That's what they want the most to do with. So it's like, okay, we know that grades are a problem in terms of equity, diversity, inclusion. We get that. So now what? Like, what do you do? Like, what do I do in my classes? There's a variety of solutions to this issue. And I've been practicing all kinds of different ones, some that have been better than others. One of them is feedback. I give super detailed feedback, and my students who are in this Zoom call, you can attest to that. I saw the students years ago were paying more attention to the grade than the feedback. So I just said, all right, well, no more grade. I'm just going to give you the feedback. So then you have no choice. Like you just have to focus on the feedback, right? So it lets students focus on that rather than being detracted by the quantitative measure of a grade. I also, when I do have a rubric, I let students create the rubric, or I work with students to create it. So I'll say, okay, how many points do you want for, I don't know, I'll pick something simple, like how many points do you want for grammar? How many points do you want for analysis? How many points do you want for your APA references? Stuff like that, right? And that gives students autonomy and agency over how they're assessed. So that really works. Another one I do is peer assessment. And I have students submit their work into our Google Drive. And I do that for a bunch of reasons. Partly, I mean, our university pays for the Google Suite, so we might as well use it. Also, a lot of employers use the Google Suite, so I want students to have experience with that. And also, if students put their work in a common place, they see each other's stuff. So like, oh, that one was really good. I might try something like that next time. Or, oh, I liked that and I'm going to try this. Or they kind of get that sense like, I want to step it up a little bit because everyone's seeing their work. And really that is not unlike the academic environment where our academic work is published, it's peer reviewed. It's really the same thing. It's not really voyeuristic. It's what academics and many professionals do. Another is contract grading. This is a little bit like a rubric, but kind of different. Contract grading is like, okay, to do an A, you have to do this, 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 and this. Like show up to 90% of the classes, you have to comment on a certain number of things, you have to submit 8 out of 10 assignments or whatever. So that's kind of like a contract grading. Another thing, one of the biggest things I do along with feedback is self-assessment. And I ask students to submit a self-assessment to accompany their major assignments. For example, my students in my 4th year NVC class that many of my students here have just finished taking with me, they do a major project in this course. And then when they submit the project, I ask them to submit kind of it's almost like an artist statement. So if you were to consider the project that my students do, consider that like a piece of art. And then I ask them to write this statement that accompanies their piece that says, this is how I met the requirements. This is how I approached this. This is how I feel about it now that I'm done. And I ask them, did you do anything different or creative? Did you take any risks here? Did you try something and it totally like blew up in your face? Well, okay, that's fine. You don't get penalized for that. The other thing I do, and I just did this today, Manal and Daniela, a bunch of students who are in this call that are in my 4th year class right now, I ask students, what grade do you think you deserve in this class? I just sent that form out this morning. I sent a Google form and I ask a series of questions. Did you show up for class? Did you engage with your classmates? I have I don't know, it was probably about 8 questions. How do you feel about your project? Did you comment on your colleagues' work? Stuff like that. And I asked them, what grade do you think you deserve in this class? And I will tell you, all the years that I've been doing this, I've probably been doing this for probably 4 years, maybe 5 years now. I have only once lowered a grade. I've only ever raised a grade for a student. Students tend to be a little bit self-critical. And so I'll be like, come on, man, you're not getting a B in this class or whatever. And I had one student who really didn't deserve an A+. The student said, I think I want an A+. And I was like, no, man, I think we need to talk about this. We set up a Zoom meeting and the student was laughing and said, well, I just figured I might as well ask. So we had a conversation. It was great. So we had that rapport going on. The other thing that my colleague, Dr. Joelle Rodway at Memorial University does, and she's doing this, she started it today, is she does grading conferences. This is super time consuming. I don't know how she's fitting this into her life. I hope her classes are smaller than mine, but she meets for a set period of time with each student and talks about how was your work? How'd it go? What do you think you need in this class? What do you think should go in your transcript? So I'll let you in on a bit of a secret. When I am constructing assessments for all of my classes, that is when I'm creating assignments, I think about 3 things when I'm creating any assignment for my classes. And my students, I hope you will validate my claims here. I ask myself 3 questions when I create any assignment. The first one is, will this assignment make my students more interesting at parties? I swear, this is a really good measure of whether an assignment is good, because I want students to be able to articulate what they've learned and take it somewhere and be able to talk about it in a very accessible way. So I'm not really interested in if they can spell, ethical theories or whatever, all that kind of stuff. I want them to be able to articulate that to someone who has no idea what this is about. And I always tell my students, this class is going to make you more interesting at parties. This has kind of been a terrible claim for the last couple of semesters because no one's going to parties. But anyway, usually it works really well. And someday we all will go to parties. And my students are going to be the most interesting people in the room. So the other question I ask myself is, would I want to do this assignment? And I think this one's really helpful. Would I want to do this? And my students will also tell you, I do every single assignment with my students. When they put their stuff in the Google Drive, I do the assignment too. And I put my own reflection, I put my own work in the Google Drive. And sometimes my work is a little bit different because it's like I have a different perspective and, you know, a different vantage point, but I do it too. So they're seeing me model that. And I think that's so important. So would I want to do this? And then the last question I ask myself before I make any assignment is, am I going to hate my life when I'm giving students feedback? Because any instructor will hate their life if they're reading 45 essays about the same thing. That would suck. That would be terrible. I would hate that. So I let my students choose what they write about, choose what they analyze, choose what they reflect upon. And when I'm giving my students feedback, it's so interesting. I wake up in the morning, I'm like, oh my God, I get to go look at my students' work. It's so fun because no two things are going to be the same because every student is different and every student chooses something different. So at the end of the semester, I asked students, what do you think of this whole like non-grading thing? So I ask them every year, like, what do you think? And this is going to be death by PowerPoint, but I'm like breaking all my rules in terms of PowerPoint, but it's cool. It's good. I asked my students, what did you think of this? And this is really long, but anyway, it's kind of fun. The student said, I love the non-grading thing. I'm going to love it until the day I die. I'm like, okay, awesome. This is great. So what this student comment is saying is that he or she, this is all anonymous, they feel, I get the sense from this student that they're a little bit anxious and grades are anxiety inducing. So to remove that and just to go and do the work you want to do is liberating, right? So that part's really cool. And then this student said, well, usually in other classes, I try to get a good grade, but in this class, I wanted to just express myself without being worried about that. So I read this one, and it's like, this student said they want to be the highlight of my university experience. And I was like, you know what, man, I can just retire now. I had talked to my provost and I just need to like accelerate myself here and my work here is done. But then I saw that my provost is on this call. So I don't know, Laurie, we're going to have a conversation about this. But I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to hang around. I'm going to be the relic on campus. I'm going to be like 80 and like riding my bike around campus. The one challenge, I mean, this whole system is not perfect. The challenge that my students find is that they've been getting grades since they were 4 years old. Then they come to my class when they're 20 and they're like, what? What are you talking about? I'm not getting my pat on the back. I'm not getting my A+. No. So that's where the problem is. Usually that kind of rectifies itself pretty quickly. And that doesn't really, it doesn't really extend itself very long. Usually students feel pretty chill about this after a little while. Once they kind of get to know me, they're realizing, okay, this is not a threat. So our education system is based on power. It's based on control. It's based on conformity for the most part. Instructors have power and control over students. And we expect that all students are going to have the same mastery over the same stuff. But I don't really see it that way. I want to think about making it creative, making it fun. I want my classes to be fun. I want my students to be like, okay, awesome. It's Thursday. I get to go to class. And I want it to be worthwhile. So how do you create this power with rather than power over? And I can illustrate this with a really quick story. I have a student in my 4th year practicum course, and there's a bunch of you in this call tonight. It's kind of like a co-op class, like at other universities where students will go to like work at a business or an organization in the community. And then I supervise the academic part, the reflection part, the sort of theory meets practice part. And our experiential learning office asks supervisors of the students' placements, to like rank the students, what's their initiative, how are their communication skills, whatever. And I don't have enough power right now to change this, but it's like a ranking thing. It's like, rate your practicum student on a scale of 1 to 10. And that makes me feel a bit sick in my stomach, but I'm going to change that because I'm just going to. So some of the questions really weren't all that relevant this semester because of COVID and the students are doing remote stuff. And so this one student scored like a not 10 out of a couple of the questions, like, I don't know, maybe an 8 or something. So she emailed me and she said, I'm really worried about this. Like, I got an 8 out of 10. Like, is this going to affect my grade? And I was like, okay. Well, I set up a Zoom meeting and we chatted. And I said, okay, at the end of term, you're going to have your assessment from your supervisor. You're going to have 5 assignments that I created, all of which are very different. You're going to have comments from your colleagues. I've given a variety of assessments. It's not like midterm final and it's over. It's a variety of experiences. So I think that's really key, is having a variety of assessment methods so that students can play to their strengths. Like, some students are terrible at exams. So why do we do that? Like, why do we have just a midterm and final, right? There are some students who are super creative with like graphic design. And then there are some students who are like, I hate that. And that's fine. That's great. They shouldn't have to do it one way or the other. They should be able to do it in a way that works for them. So this is possible in other disciplines as well. Like, I'm in communication and digital media studies. You can do this in science. You can do this in math. I actually have a new friend, Dr. Rachel DeCoste from Wheaton College, my alma mater, and she teaches math and she does ungrading in math. So it's totally possible. It depends on your course and the content, and it really depends on how much of a rebel you want to be. And for me, the answer is very. So there are objections. Okay, like, this is not all hearts and flowers and rainbows coming out of a unicorn, right? People are going to say, well, I don't want my doctor or I don't want my lawyer to be getting bad grades. I want like a really good doctor. I want a really good lawyer. Well, okay, that's great. I have colleagues who say, well, I would do this, but there's always like this but, right? I will tell you, and I've done the research, most elite medical schools, 18 of the top 20 medical schools, use only pass-fail for their preclinical courses, only pass-fail. Most med schools, most top med schools did this because they were just plagued with high rates of suicide, and they wanted to kind of release the pressure valve on students and have kind of a more cooperative community. So that happens. Ivy League universities, such as Brown, my colleague, Dr. Veronica Kitchen went to Brown. They give undergrad students the option to take almost all of their classes in the pass-fail system. They call it satisfactory or no credit. So this is an Ivy League school that does this. Law schools, not so much. You lawyers are a tough crowd. So Harvard actually moved from like the A to F thing to honors, pass, low pass, and fail. It's basically the same as A to F. Yale did the same thing. Stanford did the same thing. But here's the thing. These law schools changed the numerical grade to a word. So instead of an A, it's honors. Instead of a like B, it's a pass. Instead of a C, it's a low pass, right? So that shows a little bit of a desire to move away from this ranking and sorting. But at the same time, they're still white knuckling onto this ranking, onto this grading and assessment, and kind of one person being better than the other. So it shows a little bit of discomfort with grades, but it also shows like a hanging on to this, with a tight fist. So when like at the end of the semester, throughout the semester, when I give my students assignments, I really shifted from the protocol of saying that I'm grading. It's end of semester. I have like 999 projects to give students feedback on, but I never ever say I'm grading. Like people say like, oh, it's like teachers are like, oh my God, I have to grade all these essays. Well, you know what? I don't. I give students feedback. And it feels so different to say, oh, what are, you know, my writing group will say, oh, what are you working on? I'll say, oh, well, I'm not writing today. I'm giving students their feedback. And it feels so different from like, ugh, I'm grading. And students they're on the other end. They're saying like, oh, well, they're not getting grades. Like, oh, I'm getting feedback from Sharon on this assignment. And that's cool. So it's fun. It just gives everybody so much more freedom, and you just kind of unshackle yourself from this. So this is me. I'm an associate professor at Ontario Tech. Hit me up on Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat. I kind of let myself out of the bag here. I was anonymous for a long time on Twitter, but now I just have so much to share, and I don't want to do that anonymously. I want to do this advocacy in the name of students and in equity and diversity inclusion. So this was so fun. I really appreciate everybody being here when you could be, you know, out partying. So thanks for joining me. I would love to take questions or have conversation.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Sharon. I am going to pop over to a question that's come up from 3 or 4 people in a few different versions in the comments. So I'm just going to hop on to the last version of it I see. Thank you for sharing these suggestions. Love them. Any suggestions for those of us teaching larger courses?
Yes. When you say large, large is relative, right? Like my biggest class this semester, I think, is 65. And that's a 4th year class. So for a 4th year class, that's pretty big. Large classes like 1,000, large classes like 500. Part of it, some of the things I like to do is peer assessment, you know, but not in a threatening way, in a collaborative way, like asking students to collaborate with each other. So I would suggest peer assessment, and the self-assessment, I think, is so, I don't know, it's so powerful. Like when you ask a student, like, what do you think? Like, how did that go for you? It really invites them to reflect on a deeper level about that. I've seen a couple of comments in the chat about the ungrading Twitter chat. I'm part of that whole gang on Saturdays, on the Twitter chat about ungrading, and it's doable. I think you have to really consider what it's like to be a student, right? Like if you're in a big class, how can you learn in a large environment and make that clear, right? So certainly the self-assessment, peer assessment, another thing that a lot of faculty do in large classes is kind of sort of ungrading a little bit. They'll have some tests, exams, assignments that count as grades, maybe half of them. And then the other half, they'll do low stakes or no stakes, just like kind of like practice quizzes or practice questions or web-based stuff where they get an answer or they get like an assessment, but it doesn't count for anything. So that can be really helpful too. So you don't have to go like whole hog. You can go half, you know, and that kind of gives the students, it just kind of it like takes the pressure off, right? So I think even introducing, even if you're starting like 25% of coursework, no stakes or low stakes, and then figure out what works, because every every university, every cohort of students, it all has its own flavor, right? So my student, Miguel, thank you, Miguel, you're so great. Ungrading is more reflective on how things are in the real world, right? Like my dean doesn't breathe down my neck and ask me exactly what I'm doing every day. Like that's crazy. So, try different stuff. I love the no stakes or low stakes. That one's pretty fun. What other questions? Do you see like any, Andrea?
I've got one that is swinging us back around to your addiction metaphor and asking how do we detox from our addiction to grades, both faculty and students?
Wow, that's a great question. How do you detox from grades? I did it kind of gradually. I didn't wake up one day and was like, forget it. I'm just going to not give grades anymore. I started it gradually. Like I kind of had to do that because I wasn't really sure how my students were going to take to it. And I didn't know if they would still do the work if they didn't get the grade. But it didn't work out that way. Everyone played. So I think where I started, I'm thinking like the trajectory of my career. I think the first thing I did was think exams are dumb and I'm not going to give exams. That was my first, like, I'm a rebel. That was like my first, like, big kind of like, I don't know, fingers up to the system. And then after that, it kind of like trickled through. But I think exams are a really awful way of measuring someone's wellness or like their learning, right? My students are mentioning, the Kahoot exam. Thank you. My students reminded me in my third year ethics class, I don't do an exam. You all are warming my heart. I don't do an exam. I do an epic finale. And they're all like, what's an epic finale? What's that? And like everyone comes to class and like, what's going to happen? And it's always on the last day of class. So I do this. It's just a silly game where they're all in teams and like everyone's ending up cheering and laughing. And instead of an exam, an epic finale feels like, okay, cool. That kind of feels good. That's fun. And they learned, right? And they learned because they remember that it was funny. And I had like ridiculous pictures of Trump and like other weird things in the exam. And it was super fun. And they remember it because the humor was there and the fun was there. So I think the first thing is like ditch exams first. I think, Rachel DeCoste, my new friend from my alma mater. So she teaches calculus and she doesn't give exams. It's amazing. My colleague Susan asked academic integrity. There's no problem with that. Like if we're playing games in class, no one's cheating. It's fun. No one's going to cheat on a fun thing, right? No one does that. Like, well, I mean, my kids cheat at Catan and Monopoly and stuff like that. But, when we're doing it in class in university, it's fun. And there's like, it's this crazy, like, I don't know, it gets loud and funny and it's really enjoyable. So I haven't had any, there's no cheating. I don't think I'm being naive in thinking that, but it hasn't in my estimation.
Folks are asking a few different versions of a similar question. If you notice any trends in how students self-assign themselves grades that are related to demographic factors, so various levels of socioeconomic privilege, gender, and if you see stuff falling out along any lines like that.
Yes. It's hard to quantify that because I don't ask like, what is your ethnicity? What is your age? Are your parents immigrants? Like, are you a first-gen student? Like, I don't ask these questions. So I can't, my answer is going to be more anecdotal than quantifiable. But generally speaking, I find that women are very hard on themselves. And this is something that I relate to in my own gender issues. But I have a lot of women will say, well, I don't want to be greedy. I don't want to like toot my own horn. I don't want to, so there's a little bit of that. And I find that students are very, just very respectful, and they're afraid to ask for too much, right? I sometimes students who are in first generation situations are like they might be experience something really punitive if they don't get the A, if they don't get the A plus, right? And so I've had students say to me, like, my parents are going to lose their minds if I don't get an A in this class. Like, what can I do? Like, okay, well, let's work on this. We're going to figure this out, right? And so that invites a whole other conversation. But I find a lot of times as first generation students worried about asking for too much and women asking for too much. That's my anecdotal answer. But I always tell students, like, it's okay to want good things in your life. It's okay to feel like you worked really hard. And it's okay to feel like you had a meaningful experience. And it's okay to say that your grade on your transcript reflects that meaningful experience.
That is actually a fantastic segue into the next few question threads that I wanted to pull together of people are curious about these sort of nuts and bolts when it comes to putting something on a student's transcript.
Yeah.
Right? So what is the actual thing that shows up on the administrative side as a result of this process?
Yes, so that's a great question. I realize I didn't cover a whole lot of that. So today, for example, this morning, I got up before 90% of the world and made a Google form for all my students to fill out. And I asked them, like, how did you relate with your classmates? How did you, how was your project? How was this? How did that all go? And then I say, even though I haven't given you a grade throughout the semester, I've given you tons of feedback, like extensive feedback. But we operate in a system where you need a grade on your transcript. Like, I'm rebellious, but I have not been able to shake the tree enough to move beyond that. So students still need a grade. So I say to them, what do you think you deserve and why? And so we still, this is why it's rebellious, right? Because we still work within the system. Like, we're working the system, right? But we're doing it in our own way. And that's what I find really fun, because they still get a grade. It still goes on the transcript. It can still go on to if they apply to grad school or whatever. So we're playing within the system, but we've invented our own rules kind of in the underground, kind of like speakeasy way, So that's, does that answer the question? Does that work? Was there more to that? I kind of forget.
No, I think people were just wondering how to enter all the things that have to be entered at the end of the semester.
Totally.
Right?
Yeah.
And there was a great addition to that of how to do something this kind of, well, rebellious, as you say, if you are in a more precarious job situation, if you are a sessional or contract instructor, and how do you make a rebellious system like this work when your work is contingent?
Right. That's another good question. I think ditching exams is not as rebellious as it would have been 10 years ago, right? So if someone's adjunct or, I don't know, like a postdoc or something like that. I think that's still within the boundaries of like playing by the rules. But I think also, especially at the university at Ontario Tech, like it's a pretty forward-thinking place. And I think we don't have a lot of the like, oh, well, we've always done it this way, so you have to do it this way. And I think if an adjunct or a postdoc or someone who's in a more precarious academic situation if that person can build a rapport with students and create an environment that is safe enough for students, that it'll work, right? So there's a little bit of risk taking, but I think there's an opportunity for people to make a name for themselves and kind of make a stand, sort of. The other issue is that, and this is something that I've been talking with a lot of my academic friends about, like Rule, who's here with me tonight, Amanda Bittner, who's here. We've been talking about advocating for junior faculty members. So I would encourage junior faculty members to reach out to senior faculty members like myself. I can't even believe I'm a senior faculty member. I'm still 21. This is ridiculous. But like reach out to people like us and ask us, like, can you advocate for me? Can you help me? Can you look at my syllabus? Can you look at these assessments? That kind of mentoring, I think, is critical at this stage in my career. Like, this stage in my career is about other people. It's not about me. So I want to take on that advocacy. I know Rule does, Amanda does. Amanda's won like 1 million mentoring awards. So that's on people who are senior as well. Like, that's not, I don't want to put the onus on junior faculty. I think a lot of the responsibility is ours when we're senior faculty members.
There's a few folks who are curious about, hold on, let me scroll back up and grab that language. How do we operationalize this? Right? So how do you bring it into being?
How do you operate? That's such a grad school word. Oh my God, I love it. Well, I think some of that is, I don't know if we have to. I don't know. I'm kind of giving a bit of a non-answer. I realize that's another academic thing to do. But do we need to confine ourselves to what this is or could be, right? Because the academic environment is changing so quickly, and we have to adapt to that, right? We can't keep doing things the way they were. A year and a bit ago, we literally changed everything in 2 days. Like, everything changed literally overnight. So I think we have to adapt and change, and that flexibility, I think, is really important. So how do we operationalize this? We can define grading by not defining it. Oh no, I'm getting a little philosophical here, but does that help? Looking at some of the chat. I'll let you moderate that, Andrea.
Yeah, a few folks have chimed in. They are curious about a question Emily is asking of how to keep track of what students are doing and making sure that you don't miss out on some of the work that they're putting in.
Okay. I do this in several ways. One is some of the new tech tools I'm using, and this is another talk. But for example, I'm using a tool called Perusal, and that kind of like keeps track of student participation without being kind of surveillance-y. You know, it's like students are not, it doesn't tell me when they log in and when they log out and how long they've been on and whatever, but it tells me if they've done the work. So that's certainly part of it. These kinds of tech tools we need to leverage, because if we're teaching large classes, we need to learn new tech tools, we need to use them, and we need to kind of exploit them for what they're worth, right? So if we have these new tech tools, yeah, I want to know, did like 8 out of 10 students in group A do the stuff or whatever? The other thing we can do is sometimes I'll just take a quick look in Google Drive. If I have 100 students, I don't know, my mind is like a vault. Like I have a memory like a steel trap. So I remember names, right? So I'll be like, oh, I haven't seen this person. Like I know Daphne, who's in this group right now. I remember an email that she sent me about a voice note that I gave her like 2 months ago. So part of it is just like kind of my steel trap mind. But I think when you care about student success, it becomes evident. And that kind of keeping track just kind of happens. Does that seem pie in the sky? It might.
I think it is a really wonderful note to end on, this kind of optimistic, let's make the tech work for us and put it in the service of what students are joining us in the classroom for. So I would like to thank everybody for taking your time to join us this evening. I would like to ask you to join me in thanking Sharon once again for giving us so much to reflect on, especially at the sort of final exam and assignment time of year. And I am looking forward to seeing everybody at our next and final talk in 2 weeks about video games and crime. So thank you so much, and I hope everyone has a fabulous rest of your day or night, depending on where you are.
Thanks, folks. So great to see so many of my Twitter friends and my students and my writing group. Oh my God. Thanks, Andrea.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you. Good night from the library.